Humans of the cardboard, welcome back to Just Nuts, guys. Yet again, we need to talk about the format. This is looking very much Tier 0 format-ish. I mean, 81% representation in the first YCS. It's looking like some pretty high representation for the current YCS going on. I believe is it Germany? Is Germany where it's happening? So, wherever it is, I believe it's in Europe. It's looking like, Tier's definitely going to be there in full spades again. So we need to talk about this. I'm a rogue player. You guys know what I like to do. I like to find decks that are able to capitalize on the current metagame, but this is a tough one because you've seen a lot of power creep in the last couple of sets. Tier has extended its lead in front of all of the rest, so these are 10 decks that I think can compete with it because of the specific things that are in the format. We'll go over those real quickly before we jump into it. Yeah, it's tough. And keep in mind, full disclaimer, before we jump into it, these are decks that I do not think are better than Tier. I do not think will even most likely have an awesome win rate versus Tier, like over 50% even. But I do think they're decks that, because of the specific attributes that Tier has, do have some matchup advantages, but still the difference in engine is quite drastic in a lot of these cases. So keep that in mind. I just think these decks can hang with them, relatively well. Relatively speaking. So let's get into this thing. Starting off with what we need to keep in mind first and foremost, let's talk about the Tier stuff themselves. Obviously, keep in mind, Tier, it floats. It floats insanely well. Every single card in the archetype floats. The spells, the traps, the monsters. You would like to play a deck, ideally, that is not sending those cards to graveyard by card effect. So that'll definitely be a factor. Big factor there. Next up, the Bestials. This is a new part of the metagame, and you're just finding these everywhere, whether it's somebody playing these to hate on Tier, whether they're played in Tier just because they're so good and they're expecting the mirror match. You need to be ready for Bestials. They're very good. Quick effect DD Crows on legs with more value is nothing to scoff at. So if you just lose to Bestials, you probably can't play this format. It's just the sad truth. The ISHIZU monsters. This is the newest factor here. We had looked at this deck a little bit like a couple weeks ago, talking kind of in the same topic here, but that was before the ISHIZU cards came out. So things have changed, because if you weren't if you were a graveyard deck but you didn't lose to getting lights and darks quick removed from grave, you might have still been in an okay position. But now with Mudora and Keldo, it is so hard. It's so much harder now. Like any deck that plays out of the graveyard, it's probably just a weaker deck engine-wise than Tier. So you're probably just getting cooked by Mudora and Keldo. So definitely be very open about those cards. And the last thing I'll throw out there is Orange Light. It's definitely a huge swing card. It's the kind of card that if you do not play around it, and especially rogue decks, a lot of rogue decks get super hella punished by this card, especially if they're hitting any of the ISHIZU monsters with it. Which is usually what they're hitting with it, but then they're getting another mill 5. They're going to also have a shuffle 3 on top of the monster negate. It becomes very hard to deal with. So those are the factors, the biggest factors. There are a couple of other small things, but I don't have 30 minutes to do a whole video on that. So let's get into it. First up is Sprite. We'll get this out of the way. I think Sprite is one of the few decks that can play here. And I don't even think Sprite necessarily has an awesome matchup versus Tier. I just think it doesn't have a terrible one. And it's probably just the next best engine in the game. So yeah, doesn't lose to Bestials. Well, Bestials are annoying for it, but it doesn't straight up lose to them. The Shuffle from Grave, whatever. They can mitigate Elf. You know what I mean? That's pretty much all they really do. And, they definitely have some pretty powerful boards at times in utility with stuff like Mannequin Cat. So it works out. Whoa! Next up, Jesus, Fluanderies. This is the other one that we know can compete this format. It's a Shifter deck. Shifter is a huge leg up on this format just because we know how much Tier hates that card. So yeah, get to play Shifter. Other than that, the deck's fairly consistent. The only time the deck really stinks is when it just loses to itself and you just see really lackluster hands, which can happen, but it is what it is. So yeah, it works out. It's a powerful deck. It is what it is. Moving on. I'm going to throw this as generic Pendulum. I'm still not exactly sure what exactly is the best way to play Pendulum. I don't know if it's a Draco Slayer variant, more pure I don't know if it's Draco Slayer Odd Eyes, Draco Slayer Pendulum Magician. going back and just going like hard Pendulum Magician. I do not know what the true best Pendulum variant is at this point, but I do believe it has legs, especially, I do think the Draco Slayers have a little bit of bonus because going second, they can search any field spell. So like going second, you can search Mystic Mind. Going first, you can search Necro Valley, right? And so that gives you ways to play versus tier already. It's decent. It's better than Pendulum decks have been at playing an Interruption. Still not amazing at it, but it's like respectable enough. So I think they're pretty good. I think they have some high power. Trouble going second, but as long as you see the right cards, and maybe it's just we haven't figured out the best way to build it for this format, I do think it'll have legs. And again, doesn't really care about Graveyard Disruption almost whatsoever. So Keldo, Mudora, Bestials, kind of just, not a huge factor here for them. So I think they have a good option there. Next up is Rika, or whatever you want to call it, the Rika Plant deck. Although if you play the Plant version, it does lose harder to Graveyard Interruption. I think the more Rika cards you have, the less vulnerable you are to Graveyard Interruption. Now I understand this. This is like the one annoying part. The coolest thing about Rika is you end up with the Monster Negate engrave, and you also end up with Petal engrave for follow-up. So losing those to Mudora and Keldo, not really to Bestials, but Mudora and Keldo can be really annoying, but at least the Monster Negate can still negate a Keldo or Mudora, and they would force them to have 2 to also clear the Petal. Or, just at least forces them both out, which is okay. Other than that, this is a deck that tributes. Most of the effects that tribute are tributing your opponent's stuff for cost, which is very good. It is not triggering tier cards. So I think it kind of hits a couple of different points. Removal that's not like sending their stuff by card effect to trigger tiers. Right, like not caring a little bit, but not losing to Keldo, Mudora, or Bestials. And 3, Orange Light is the one thing that I think gives me trepidation, because I think you can just outright lose to like your normal summon or very early in your combo, just getting like Orange Lighted into a Mill 5 or into a graveyard. Because like Orange Light plus a Shuffle 3 is absolutely devastating. So those are the things you have to keep in mind and be the most careful of. But outside of that, I think you could be okay with this deck. I think it's actually not the worst option in the world, this format. Hate that my mouse is like double clicking right now. Madolches. This is a really cool deck because there's 2 different ways you can build this. You can go in and play like the Vernisylphs as well as the ISHIZU monsters, which is very, very cool. Or you just kind of play a more pure variant and stick with Shifter, right? That's going to be the trade-off. I think the engine and consistency and extendability is better if you add those engines in. But if you play Shifter, you play Shifter, right? We know how crazy Shifter is versus the format, so that could be a huge leg up. I personally like the one that just feels more reliable because your engine is just better. You still do not outright lose to Graveyard Disruption, so this is one of the few options that gets to play the ISHIZU cards without just being like brutalized by your opponent's ISHIZU cards. So it gets to play them and have the good matchup versus your opponent in terms of disrupting them. They don't disrupt you quite as hard with them, which is really nice. Orange Light's still annoying, but you can also play Orange Light in your list, and it'll actually be a little bit more consistent because you play more like 20 fairies in this deck. It's cool. It's definitely a really cool option. I definitely recommend you taking a look at it because I do think it needs a little bit of solving to figure out exactly where the list like should and needs to be. But I do think it's being slept on right now, and this actually could be a pretty good rogue deck. Crystal Beast. We're getting to the more janky ones. I think the ones we just went over are a little bit better, but these ones get a little bit janky. Crystal Beast is just cool. It has a search any monster combo, so cool. Just go ahead and search your ass a Necro Valley, and that's really good. I mean, there's not much to say there. Like, Necro Valley's insane. So, yeah. Also, I don't know how graveyard dependent. Well, you do need to search Necro Valley that way, so I guess it can't play Shifter, but if you're going to play Necro Valley anyway, I guess you don't really need Shifter that much. But yeah, it's really, really strong versus them just getting Necro Valley. Subterror is a weird one, right? Because it's just an Earth deck. You don't really play out of the graveyard much at all. So Bestials and Keldo and Mudora, whatever. But you're just 100% outclassed by tier. The deck doesn't really have like amazing removal. Your amazing removal would be like eventually getting what's his face online, the Reptile, flipping him and getting a banish once per turn. That's your best removal versus tier, which is kind of brutal. Otherwise, you have to rely too much on Dragoon, and like that's your other win condition. It is pretty strong versus tier. They don't have the cleanest outs to it, so we still take that. But yeah, it's just a deck that doesn't lose to any of the strong points of Tier, but Tier just as an engine could still probably find outs to you in a lot of situations. So it's not a great matchup, but like it's not a terrible matchup, but it's just you're just outclassed, right? Usually, but still a decent matchup. Oh gosh, why does this keep happening? And the last one here. Oh wait, I'm missing one. We're definitely missing one. What happened? What happened? Oh, one got lost here. All right, we'll talk about it after this. Zefras. I do want to talk about Zefras here. This is a really, really interesting deck because this deck is so malleable to different formats. The only reason I haven't played it for a while now is because we were in constant formats where it was literally like back to back to back. Like Anti-Spell played at 3 in every side deck, right? And then Eradicator, Epidemic Virus played super consistently. They have dropped in play, but when those were in every single deck in the side deck, this deck just straight up loses to those, like immediately on the spot. So you couldn't really play a deck like this, or Pendulum decks in general, during that time. But this deck has pretty much finds really insane win conditions versus any deck at any point. It can search any monster in the game. It has easy access to field spells if you need to. So searching Necro Valley, very doable in the deck. Searching Insane Floodgates, such as Vanity's Fiend or Majesty's Fiend, whichever you think is better. The one thing I do have trepidation about is that normally I love Zefra Path in this deck. It's an Insane Floodgate. Says either player can only summon from hand or extra, nowhere else. So no tokens, no summoning from grave, no summoning from deck. That's just not that good versus Tier. The Bestial summon from hand. The ISHIZU summon from hand. Most of the Tier extenders summon from hand. And then when they're triggering engrave, they're summoning from extra. So it really doesn't cut them off of a ton of their actual plays. And so it's just not that good. Normally that would be your fallback play. Like, oh, everything else got negated, but I have one search off of Zeph Renew. I guess I'll just get Path and I'll win because they just can't break through it. Unfortunately, that's not as consistent anymore. So yeah, you kind of have to like pivot, and maybe we don't play that. Maybe we side it because it's like Insane versus Sprite. But there are other win conditions. I'm not counting it out, but you do kind of rely a little bit more on seeing some stuff. But at the end of the day, you can play Gamma in the main, Shifter in the main. You can play Lava Golem or Sphere Mode in the main. There's still a handful of cards that this deck really facilitates that are insanely powerful and definitely could be of really good use versus those decks. So we'll take it. I still think it has a decent matchup, and I would actually like to go in and definitely hard build this deck and see if I can lab up something like legitimately good to see where we end up. And the last one that I don't have here, I don't know what happened to the picture, is Weather Painter. Just want to throw this out there. Weather Painter, I wish it, like, I still to this day am screaming. If we get one canvas card that is like even just an imperm, but it's just like an impermanence effect, but other than that it works the same as all the other canvas, I think that deck could be a legit rogue deck for years and years and years. The deck plays so in such a particular way. You can play any Floodgate you want. You can play Shifter in the main, Macro, Dimensional Fissure, right? A Skill Drain, right? A ton of these nasty, nasty Floodgates over and over again. You can play Gamma in the main. It's actually quite good because their monsters are constantly off the field. The deck can just play so many like really cool cards that a lot of decks are not built for, that are really, really strong versus stuff like Tier. But their engine just doesn't get to interruption itself. So it's like you have to see some of your engine and you have to see some of those Floodgates. But if you see all one or all the other and none of it and none of the other side, you just like, you don't do anything for the duel. Or you're like, if you just see your engine just gets outclassed by Tier. You have to see some of those blowout cards. But it's still cool. Nonetheless, I definitely think it's important to throw out there just because of that. The access to those insane cards is really, really cool. But there you go. Those are my 10 cards that my 10 decks that I think actually have decent matchups versus Tier. Again, I'm not saying these decks are going to have winning records versus Tier if you play them. I just think matchup-wise, what Tier does and what these decks do, they do have an edge matchup-wise. But Tier's effects are just crazy. Their engine is just up here. Most of these engines are down here. I would say like Sprite and Flaunders are maybe like here. It's really tough. But I do think they can at least compete with Tier is the key word here. So I'll throw that to you guys. Thank you so much for watching as always, though. I'm out of here for today. Good luck facing this Tier 0 format. We'll see how long this lasts. We'll see if we get an E-ban list. We'll see. If not, we're kind of just holding on until Photon Hypernova pretty much, and praying that around that time we'll get a ban list, we'll get the Photon Hypernova cards, and then things will change for the better, hopefully. But until then, this is what we got. So good luck, duelists. Go get them. Go get the tiers. I love you. Subscribe if you haven't. And I'll see you in the next one. Peace.